be live here in some number of seconds here. But yeah, I think we could definitely take that pathway through the material, and we'll just see where that ends up. I think we're gonna have a fun time. So
Absolutely.
yeah, with that, I think we're live at this point. So hello everyone, and welcome to another Wardley Mapping Conversations. Today we are very lucky to have Steve Pereira and João Rosa to walk us through some lovely flow engineering concepts. And flow engineering is like, as a concept, first of all, it's something I have a lot to learn about still. I haven't been on the earth long enough. But second of all, it's something that I care a lot about from the work that I did when I first got into consulting. I learned a lot about theory of constraints, views of systems, and a lot of the work that we did at Praxis Flow with Jay Bloom and Kevin Bear and Kat Swatel and friends was oriented around flow enablement and helping organizations get work done, and in ways that are very like much constraint aware. And I think that's really fabulous. And then there's like this just side plot where I'm like, okay, I love all that material. I also want to distinguish value chains from value streams, and so I think we're going to get into that a little bit. But maybe like Joao, I'm going to start with you, and then we can get to Steve and kind of get into the material a little bit. Joao, you were like, we've got to talk to Steve. We've got to get Steve on a live stream. And so maybe like you could set us up and kind of let us know about your experiences with Steve. He can be blushing, he have his ears burning while we're talking about him. But tell me about what brought you to Steve, and also what kind of motivated you to bring him onto the live stream here.
Yeah, definitely. So I'm gonna tell the story, and today, thank me to have me here for the second time. Now more in a hosty type of stuff, and welcome everyone at that side. So Steve and I got in contact with my podcast. So shameless plug, Software Crafts podcast. I have someone that recommended Steve, right? So before we record the podcast, we had 1 hour of talking about what are you doing, how our paths cross,
Mm.
right? We did that podcast. We talk a lot about flow and his work, and Steve also sent me his work, right? We're going to talk later the flow engineering, the 4x4. And it's very interesting material. And since then, we have our conversations every 4 weeks, giving or taking, that we talk about the world, right? What are we doing? How do we cross, these domain-driven design concepts with flow engineering? Now we see this thing called Wardley mapping popping up more and more. And this is how we cross. And that's why I was, okay, we need to talk with Ben, because Ben is doing live streams, and this is the opportunity of crossing communities.
I love
And
it.
for
Yeah.
and for me, the other interesting point is that you folks are on the other side of the Atlantic. So I'm in the Netherlands, more close to the European community. And sorry for the spoiler alert, but someone is in Canada, someone is in US. So how do we cross and see all of these patterns, right, going? And this really fascinates me. And maybe it's the floor for Steve. He can speak for himself. This is how we cross and start literally talking. And now we are bringing the talk to the world.
Yeah. So now that geography is kind of not the limiting factor anymore, like we're all online, very online, in fact. Now we can start crossing these communities. So, Steve, that brings us to you. Um, am I to understand correctly that you've like written a book of some kind of thing, like written a body of material?
Tiny, tiny, tiny book. Tiny little ebook.
Okay, well, all right. Writing a book, any kind of book, takes a lot of work. So walk us through what you've been working on and what you care about.
Yeah, well, the list of things I care about is problematically long. But essentially, this idea of flow has really kind of followed me my whole life. And after leaving my last gig as CTO, I wanted to get back into consulting because I wanted, I sort of go through these ebbs and flows of like I want to focus on one thing, and then now I want to expose myself to a bunch of different things. So consulting was like, okay, well, how do I want to do that now? And I look back at my whole career, and basically the common thing that I was more obsessed with than anybody else, but I saw this massive opportunity in, was flow, and looking at the flow of value through organizations. And after discovering and rediscovering and ignoring, and then ultimately adopting a way of doing value stream mapping, I thought that that was something that I wanted to bring to the world. And I've completely failed to do that in the way that you're doing this with value chain mapping. And I think, your live streams and what you're doing with Learn Wardley mapping is incredible. And I kick myself every single time I watch your stream. I'm like, I need to be doing this for value stream mapping.
Well, don't speak too soon, because you've got plenty of time. Yeah.
I feel late for everything all the time, but I honestly think that this is awesome. So I'm very, very pleased to be a part of this. And I think that these kind of conversations in real time across the world, across disciplines, this is like the ultimate. This is the trifecta of like perspective alignment, which is what I'm kind of now so passionate about in the mapping space. This idea that everybody has a different vision of reality in their heads.
Yep.
Getting it out and getting it onto a surface where we can all see the same picture is just a superpower that I think is going to explode over the next 10 years and really change the way that we do work beyond flow, beyond the value chain, beyond everything that we try to do. It's kind of going to be the medium that we try to do everything. And so I'm very, very much excited about that, and even more so than any specific topic. So I think that this is really exciting to me for many, many reasons. But the flow thing and the idea behind flow engineering comes from fluid dynamics. It's been around for a very long time, as long as there's been people studying the flow of liquid in the world. But when I was thinking about bringing the ideas behind flow and value streams to people and not having them kind of trip over the manufacturing history of value stream mapping, and thinking about, okay, well, we don't want to be in a factory. We're building software. This has to be creative. I just noticed your mug. That's a mug that I drink coffee from like every single day. Here's a really bizarre side note. Every single day, I get on a meeting with that mug full of coffee, and everyone's like, he's drinking a Guinness. He's drinking a gigantic Guinness, and this is inappropriate. And so today,
if only
I switched to a Yeti because I'm like, someone's gonna make a comment about my mug, and now I'm the person making a comment about my mug.
It's perfect.
Anyways.
Yeah. Well, I mean, somebody had to.
Terrible digression.
Right? So somebody had to do it. Yeah.
Such a great mug, though. Oh,
honestly, yeah.
My favorite mug.
Liana, my wife, got these, and they are like just perfect for just, I don't know, whether it's tea or coffee or whatever. Gotta have a big mug.
Just enough. Okay.
Yeah, excellent.
Anyways, sorry for that. Flow engineering is really an attempt to kind of look beyond value stream maps in isolation and look at the idea that anything that we can do to improve flow is something that we should do and we should be focusing on. So I just wanted to call attention with some catchy branding. People love anything engineering. And the idea that we can grab people's attention and get them focused on, let's start doing things to improve flow that don't involve automation, that don't involve buy this tool or wait until everything is set up perfectly. The power of mapping for me and collaborative mapping is this idea that you can do it tomorrow. You could do it later today with your team. You could do it alone and share it with people and iterate. But it's just this accessible way to kind of make progress with things. And so I apply that to flow, but I think really the underlying value is this collaborative mapping exercise. And you can use it for, as we know, so many different things.
So the verbiage here, the use of engineering is interesting, right? Because it hacks our brains a little bit. And I just wrote some sticky notes in the Miro board just to kind of like get some thoughts out. It's like, engineering. a thing that can be engineered, and whatever comes before it is like an interesting like juxtaposition, like flow engineering. So we're familiar with software engineering or mechanical engineering or electrical engineering, and flow engineering. Interesting. So you're telling me there's a science behind this? You're telling me there's something that I can learn and nerd out about? Like, so that's I love that kind of like almost trick in a way that it kind of opens up this whole door of possibilities around. Okay, well, first of all, what is flow? Like, what I want to know what it is that I'm engineering,
Hmm.
and just a small comment here. Like, I think what's really fun about doing these live streams and getting these kinds of collisions and talking about these kinds of ideas is we're working in public, and so like flow, whether it's about flow or whether it's about Wardley mapping or whether it's about like evident complexity or like whatever else it is, I think that it's really interesting that we can just have these lovely collisions. So let's get some of those collisions started here. What is flow?
This is a great question. I tend to try and take people from like the universe view down to the continent view by starting with the opposite, right? The opposite of flow is friction. So when we think of friction, we know things are difficult, they're slower, they are more challenging. And so flow being the opposite of friction is this kind of feeling of progress. It's this feeling of delivery, of accomplishment, um, in a more direct way. It's delivering value to customers, whether those customers are inside the organization or outside the organization or partners. But we also have personal flow, right? So we have kind of this fractal nature of flow where there's a very personal meaning as well. You know, the state of flow that we all kind of strive for, especially as engineers, especially as people in a technical context. We know the value of being in a state of flow and kind of losing ourselves in work. We're lucky enough to work in a space where that's possible. And so that to me is this multifaceted definition of something that is very human, but also it's very technical as well. It applies not only to our experience of the world, but our work out into the world, and then how work kind of flows and the products of work flow around the world and through it. Okay. So there's a 50,000 foot view, there's a 0 foot view, but I think that this idea of being unhindered and unencumbered and being continuous, I think is very, very valuable to set the context.
So I want to get into a little bit of like visualizing what making sense of flow from a value stream perspective looks like. Before I do that though, Bernie like raises an interesting point, and I think it's one that we hear a lot just in general, is flow, as in thinking about value streams, assumes like a linear view of the world. And I have my own opinions about like imposing linearity onto very messy things. And like there are ways that can be really useful, and there are also ways that can be very detrimental. But I want to open the floor to both you and João around that. So linearity, and I'm going to separate that from Taylorist, Bernie, for the moment, because I have some things about Taylor that we should get into at some point. But linearity and flow. Talk a little bit about what works about that when we think about how we deal with reality and model it, and what doesn't work about that. And maybe, João, we can start with you and kind of get into this a little bit.
Okay, so you want things to get messy, right? So you point out to chaotic space and to the messy reality, right?
Yeah.
And then you point out to the linear stuff. So it's very interesting because as humans, we look to the time as linear and the work that I do because we have cognitive aspects, and we can talk about cognitive load and put a note of team topologies. We're going to get back to that. There
One
is
way or
an
another.
element of linearity, right? As a person involved on this process, I do a set of steps to achieve something, right? When we start to have people and have a team, and teams have, and from teams we have, from a team we have teams to our organizations. That is where chaos start to emerging because you have too many lines. I do believe, and this is part of conversations that Steve and I had in offline, right? We need to map these different perspectives, right? Because if we think about software engineering, we have an idea that we design, we model, we codify, and we put that code on some runtime platform, delivering value, and then people pay for this value. People pay for these lines of code. So there is a process there, right? There is a way of doing things, and systematically thinking about these as managers, as architects, as engineers, it's a very powerful tool.
Yes.
That doesn't, the trap, I think that as you're pointing out, is thinking that the world will always behave like that. That is not true. That is when we need to stop and thinking, how many value streams do I have? Are they crossing each other? Should we disentangle them or let it be, right? And I think that is very important to make these distinctions, at least with myself. But everything points out to the cognitive load. We are humans and our brain is very, very limited. Can we at least protect that constraint?
Yeah, so I couldn't help but do some drawing while you were talking here. Like there's concept of idea to codification of that idea in like a material thing that then lives in the world and provides value and is paid for and all that fun stuff. And that's at a high level, it's hard to argue with that as a linear flow of software development, right? Software engineering and so on. But then you start, as you pointed out, you start looking at the way that people interact with it, and especially when it comes to knowledge work and things that involve knowledge, like there's a non-linearity to that, very much so, and the reality gets messier, and there are feedback loops that it doesn't always flow left to right. It actually flows backwards sometimes, and probably more times than you'd think, and there are lots of loops and things like that. And so what, Steve, I'm going to turn to you. Like, what is the linear version of the model doing for us? Why do we bother making that value stream frame for us to work with?
I think this is a fascinating subject because there is this trade-off, right? And it reminds me of this, the classic phrase that all models are wrong, but some are useful, right? Like we have to simplify things or else we can't communicate, and we can't often understand unless we distill things and boil them down. And so having methods to kind of boil things down with proper context and proper understanding that we are losing detail when we distill things. I mean, we're making things more powerful, but you are losing things. It's a matter of whether you're losing things that are valuable or not. And I think that it's kind of like a Pareto thing, right? If I can go from 80%, or if I can go from 100% of something to the 20% that gives me 80% of the value, I have served myself, and I've probably served other people. Like I think we can always go back to the source. We can always return to first principles and re-examine things. But I think to be productive and to really make progress, we have to be simplifying. We have to be able to distill things down. We need the 30-second version, probably 99% of the time, as long as there's an understanding that this is not perfect and we might have to go back and look in further detail.
So there's something really, like, I love this whole conversation, and all these like references are popping into my head. Like the "all models are wrong, some are useful" quote by George Box is right on. And one of the other things that he says, which is really fun, is like it's important to notice when things are like importantly wrong versus not importantly wrong. And in both value stream mapping and Wardley mapping, like you're making decisions. You are applying discretion about which things to model truthfully and which things to oversimplify. And I think that like discretion doesn't get talked about enough because on the one hand, I think it's easy to dismiss something that's not perfect. It's like, hey, that's not the way it really works, so therefore it's wrong. But like also, I think if you then take the other position on that and say, well, okay, yeah, it's wrong, and that's okay. You run the risk of also not valuing or not paying attention to the power of the model maker. And so that I think turns into an interesting set of questions where like one person modeling a system is going to have a very particular view of that system and a very particular set of discretionary moments and judgments about what to model in what ways. Whereas if you have a room full of people negotiating about what these views should be, and in fact having multiple rooms of people negotiating about the same system to have, I hope I'm using this word correctly, like pluriversal versions of like reality, like being able to know that there are different ends of the elephant, so to speak, to use that blind man and the elephant metaphor.
Right.
And that's okay. Like, there we start to really get into the messiness, but it's like a messiness with pockets of linearity that help us make sense of things. And I think that's lovely and important.
I totally agree with you. And I think that, as we approach the automation of everything and this like artificial intelligence explosion that's coming, this is a very human work, right? This is the thing that's going to survive, this negotiation of perspective and dealing with the messiness in creative and valuable ways. So that, we already understand that imperfect is great because it means we didn't spend too much time. We made some progress. We got enough to move forward. And I think tripping over the fact that we don't have everything is getting in the way, right? That's a huge roadblock.
Yeah, Russ Akoff, I think, is the one who talks about maps or something similar to maps a little bit. It's like when you look at a physical map, there are things missing from the map, right? And the map doesn't have, for example, all of the foliage that you would expect to see, all the trees and so on, unless it's a map that's specifically mapping that. But if it's just a road map, like it's going to emphasize and prioritize certain facets of reality and not others. And that's because there was a deliberate decision there about what was important to make conspicuous and what was kind of not important and it was okay to hide. And that makes, in his words, reality easier to carry about, to actually like pick up and work with. And I think what we're trying to do is make things pick upable and work withable. So that we can do something and interact with the reality and engage with it instead of being agencyless, I think. So let's kind of shift directions a little bit. Let's get into the methods that you describe and articulate. And I think João and I can kind of be your guinea pigs here, and we can provide ideas and examples and so on. And then maybe we can actually make some of these kinds of, or do some of these exercises that you're describing. Let's see where we go. So yeah, where would you like to start?
Sure. Let me bring in a couple examples. Maybe a place to start to set some context would be something like this, because I have thought about this like value chain to value stream thing for a while, and that might actually help people kind of like get some clarity on like where we're talking. And hopefully this comes in at decent size.
With experiences from Ben of doing value streams on top of Wardley maps. So a while ago, so someone was tweeting about that, Ben. So this will be very, very interesting. Talking
Excellent.
about collision, right?
Yeah, collision for sure. And like the most basic collision of that type, I think, is like user journeys. If you wanna mess with your Wardley map and make it really hard, layer a user journey across the top and try to make sense of it. And it's actually easier than you think, but then you start to see the collision space. And that's before you talk about like lower level processes and how everything flows. And oof. All right.
Yeah, it is tough. And it's tough even talking about value chain and value stream in the context of software, because these things are not cut and dry. Like in the physical world, you know that you have a supplier that is putting things on a truck and driving it to a factory. In the digital world, the analog starts to get challenging, and the difference between design and development starts to get challenging, because kind of design never stops and development never stops. You're kind of always creating and always adapting if you're doing it well. And so all the manufacturing paradigms, oh, this didn't come over at all.
Thinking about taking
Something went wrong. I should probably not be copying and pasting, but I don't want to spend all day trying to recreate things that have like.
I got it. Yeah, is it in your book?
This is. I don't think this is actually in my book. Let me try and bring over. Let me try it one more time.
Worst case, you can take a screenshot of something and then I'll like make a little structure based on it while you're talking through it.
Well, that's what I was trying to do, because I have everything in Mural and not Miro, so everything is coming over as a screenshot.
Got it.
But let me try one more time. Maybe there was just a glitch.
Yeah, screenshots are fine too. We can work with that. So are you doing value streams first, or do you start with like simpler kinds of exercises?
I do start with simpler kinds of exercises. That is a great starting point. And there's some history here. So to kind of introduce why I have other maps other than value stream mapping, even though I love them so much, is that a value stream map without like context or foundational work is much less valuable. So, you know, if you just dropped a bunch of people in a room and said like, okay, let's create a value stream map, it's hard to get buy-in. It's hard to establish the context. It's hard to make sure that people sort of understand why are we doing this, and make it real for people. So the starting point, and I'll try and bring this in as well. Maybe I just have to like save these and upload them instead of trying to Macify, like live drag them in. Not a term at all, but
if only the technology would accommodate.
I know the tech's supposed to be the easy thing, right? And the human thing is the hard thing, but I find sometimes that is not true. Okay, I'm just gonna make a bunch of screenshots and then I'll try and bring them over.
That's absolutely perfect.
Through uploads. But so essentially the starting point needed to be there, because I would run into this challenge where somebody would be bought into the idea of value stream mapping and they'd be like, great, we're going to do this. But then we come time to do the exercise and people were kind of trying to catch up. And so I started thinking of, okay, why we have to start value stream mapping with a goal. Like it's really important to have a target, which is often like in my space, it's usually like, let's try and deliver software twice as fast, or let's try and release every week. That's pretty common.
Got it.
But what we try to do is kind of break that down a little bit and make it real for people. Because even that, it doesn't necessarily speak to everybody. So that's where outcome mapping came from, was this desire to sort of look at, okay, we have a desired outcome. Why do we want this? To make it real? And then what are the obstacles in the way that why haven't we accomplished this already? And then looking at things like, okay, what can we do to sort of investigate this challenge and understand more about that? And that was kind of a more natural flow into value stream mapping, starting from outcomes and kind of teasing apart an outcome.
Got it.
And making it more real.
Okay,
and
that's
then that
really
kind of
useful. Because oftentimes people start with solutions and then they're just like, well, we're just doing the solution. And okay, what problem are we trying to solve? Well, the absence of the solution. Like we're trying to, we don't have a value stream map, so we got to have a value stream map. That's not the problem at all. And it's what it's doing for you is very, very different. So, okay. What's the span of kinds of answers from outcome mapping that you kind of expect? Like, why do we want this? Is it all about usually delivery, or is it about other kinds of things as well?
Well, you could really have any desired outcome, anything that you want to do. You know, if I wanted to learn Wardley mapping in the next 30 days, then I take that desired outcome and I look at, okay, why do I want that, right? What's going to make that resonate? And this is kind of like, it's an interesting thing because people say start with why. You have to start with an outcome first. You have to have a thing that has a why. You can't just have a why. You have a goal and then you have a why, and that's what makes a why relevant or valuable. So we start with the outcome, then we look at why to kind of anchor it. And I think that what's also valuable is because this is all collaborative, people have different whys, and it's really valuable to kind of uncover all the different whys across everyone's different perspectives. And so that's one of the main powerful things that we don't do often, right? We don't think about what's your why versus my why, and how can I appreciate more about your why from the very beginning of this exercise.
Yeah.
So then we look at, okay, so I want to learn Wordly mapping in the next 30 days because it gives me a new way to look at my work or my environment. It gives me a new way of thinking about systems. It gives me a new way of thinking about customers and serving customers. And then I would look at, beyond the why, I look at obstacles because I'm thinking, why haven't I accomplished this already, right? And what are the things that are going to get in my way as I step off the starting blocks with this, so that we can kind of anticipate challenges, we can expose fears as well. And we can really have a conversation about like, what is going to make this challenging before it gets challenging, so that we can maybe come up with some strategies, but at least just get it out of, that thing I'm afraid of, that, we always struggle with this thing. Get that out and in front of everybody so that we can talk about it and use it as a reference.
Got it.
And then you look at mitigations or things or experiments, things that you're going to use to kind of poke at the obstacles and poke at the problem from different angles to better understand it. And that forms this kind of solid foundation for creating a value stream map that's really based on a common understanding and a solid foundation.
Got it. Okay. So why are we doing this? What are our different whys? And that's an active negotiation. And then what's in the way of us accomplishing that? Like, how can we actually appreciate a common set of understandings of the problems that are in our way? And then that helps us position why a value stream map might be useful. Is that kind of the way that works then?
Yeah, I mean, we look at, obviously there's a framing on value stream mapping, like the team has already sort of bought into this idea of mapping. So that's one of the strategies that we're going to use. But it's also an opportunity to open it up to the floor to say, what else do we want to try? Do we want to incorporate event storming into this? Should we incorporate Wardley mapping into this exercise? because we don't want to be prescriptive. We don't want to say we have to follow this. I think one of the main things about flow engineering is that it's not just these four maps that I say go in an order.
Mm-hmm.
These are four maps that I think flow into each other, but they accomplish goals that are accomplished by many other different types of maps as well.
Okay.
You know, like you could swap impact mapping in for outcome mapping if that's something that you're more comfortable with, or, you know, your team is already using on a regular basis. You're not, you know, you're going to get the 80% of the value with that approach. You might get 100% of the value by using a different map that's accomplishing the same purpose.
Got it.
And so you could swap impact mapping for outcome mapping. You could come up with your own thing. You could use something like V2MOM probably to frame this. And then when it comes to value stream mapping, you could use event storming instead of value stream mapping. You could use anything that is going to look at flow and the progress of value through the system.
That reminds me of
so
Goldrat's kind of so from the goal and the theory of constraints. Goldrat would talk about change management, or really like how people would resist change a lot. And he's like, people don't resist change. Don't tell me that. I don't believe that at all. Like if I came up to you and offered you $1 million, would you resist that change? Probably not. And so a lot of what his work was trying to highlight was like, how do you navigate the like the messiness of getting kind of all the facts on the table, helping people see why change is useful. And I think that's true of change at large, as true as it is there as it is with methodologies. Like, why would we bother doing all this work? I feel like this is a problem that designers have a lot too, like, because designers like process and not like process management, but more like they like getting steeped in a process that opens up all these possibilities and builds an appreciation of things. And I just remember Goldrat would attack change from 4 different angles. He would like, what are the pros of change? What are the cons of change? But then what are the pros of not changing and the cons of not changing? And I think that's just as true for methodology. Like, what are the pros of value stream mapping? What are the cons of value stream mapping? And what are the pros of not value stream mapping? And what are the cons of not value stream mapping as well? And I think that builds up a deeper appreciation. But that negotiation of what other methods could be used also puts some of the control back in the hands of the people doing the work. So awesome. This is really excellent. Like, maybe we should start getting into some examples here. Oh, I see you got an outcome map here. Okay.
So here's the thing. This is something I forget. I use Opera on a regular basis, and I don't know why. I just dig it as a browser.
Yeah.
But it doesn't play nice with a lot of things. And then I realized way too late that it's like causing problems.
So it goes.
Because it's not Chrome. Yeah. So this is an example of what I was mentioning with outcome mapping. It's very simple. It's really just looking at this grouping. It's really just like the core of it is pulling ideas out of people's heads, different perspectives out of people's heads.
Okay.
And then the value stream map, this is a very simplified representation, but this is the kind of value stream map that I like to create with people because I don't want it to be complex. I don't want you to have to learn anything to read it. The idea that, you know, we can like you were saying about Goldrat and the idea that models are wrong but useful. It's like, what is the consequence of not modeling this? What is the consequence of not creating a simplified illustration of this, even though it's going to be imperfect and even though it might not satisfy our desire for clarity, or exhaustive clarity.
I'm gonna recreate this diagram real quick in Miro, and maybe this will get us like launched into playing a little bit with this. So this is an interesting value stream map, and João, like, from your experience working with software teams and making sense of things, like, does this seem like a likely story? Is there anything missing from an example that you would want to give around how software becomes a real tangible material thing? Like, here we're starting with sprint planning. Like, is there anything missing from your perspective around this process? This flow?
Well, I don't miss it, right? From a visibility point of view, right? We are often, or I see these methods be very helpful when we start to scale, right? Having teams of teams operating under divisions or departments that needs to interact with each other, right? That is where things get messy really quick. And be able to look how we spend our time, how we interact with each other. Because doing software, as Steve pointed out in the beginning, is something that is not a factory, right? We have a bigger body of knowledge, and even the work that Simon Wardley brought with showing how going to the cloud change our practices. We adopt DevOps and we start to merge stuff. Shows our industry is. So picking up this particular example, it's pretty straightforward, and I think that is simple enough for us to start discussing it, right? Because we can think about the enterprise with two silos. We have that QA testing and UAT and deployment done by other department. What that means? Why is that there?
So let's draw that line real quick. So we've got this flow from left to right, and where's the boundary between these silos? Is it right here?
Well, this is something that I think arises out of the value stream mapping exercise. And I've pasted in a more complex example, actually a couple more complex examples of different layers
I'll say.
below here where, we're using this basic spine, right? The spine of the basic value stream, you can add on extra detail as much as you want. You could represent anything that fits into that linear flow in a constructive way. But you can see we have things like throwbacks, right? We can identify where work is getting tossed back, and you can correlate that with quality degradation. So you can say, okay, our quality is declining, that's why it gets thrown back.
Yeah.
And so these multiple layers really help you kind of diagnose things. But specifically in terms of silos and different roles, representing those, I represent them as dots, but it helps people see like, okay, we have the product owner involved in all these steps until here, and then it gets tossed to this other department. It gets taken over from an ownership perspective by somebody else. And there's a very clear sort of boundary silo visible there. And again, these are all kind of, this one's a little bit higher level. Like this is probably closer to like a release process, but at a release process, you're going to have those silos more often than in a sprint, right? In the sprint, you're hopefully working within the same team, but you might go beyond silos to go to a DBA and get a consult from someone who's a specific expert or, another specialized team.
Okay, now this gets really interesting because, so in general, from left to right, there's this flow, right? And that flow is time. And
generally, yeah.
But the thing is, that's like slammed on top of a mess. Like the imposition of linearity is just like, let's pretend that this is the way it works at the top. And what you started to do here with the roles involved is you started to sort of allude to that mess. And there's like all sorts of like kind of scribbly stuff happening underneath this API layer, so to speak. Like if the way that we access the process is by imposing this linear kind of flow at the top, and then if we peel back the covers and we see like, oh, actually there's like one person going here and then going here and here and here and here and here and here, and then sometimes things go backwards and like suddenly the mess starts to emerge once you peel back the layers. And there's something similar with Wardley mapping, I think, that happens. So one of the things that we do on occasion is we'll do a user journey across the top. And with Wardley mapping, like the structure is not time, the structure is evolution. And evolution, like, yes, things to the right tend to have progressed in time, but things can actually decay as well. And so it's not actually a linear flow. Like something can age and decay and then move backwards in evolution, or at least that's the way we're we're claiming it to be.
Yeah.
So there's that, and so like you can have your linear flow across the top, but your map, like there's this moment where across the top the left rightness changes meaning,
Hmm.
where like time is up here and then below is evolution. If you'll forgive my horrible mouse handwriting, as in I'm writing with the mouse, not emulating a
You got
mouse.
Well,
that?
it's really interesting. There's things that I kind of taking out of what you're highlighting here, and it's awesome to get your read on this, because we think of time as a simple construct, but there's time isn't time when you've got multiple people experiencing time and contributing to the flow, right?
There's a
when
quote.
once when we have like five people working on something, it's very different to measure the time passing than one person, because it's five times as much time being spent, right? um, in parallel. And then rework is this revisiting. You're incurring the penalty of time over again, even though time has progressed. Effectively, it hasn't progressed for your customer, because your customer is waiting. Well, it's progressed in the wrong way,
Hmm.
but the work hasn't progressed even though the time has progressed. That's probably a better way of looking at it.
They haven't gotten the
So that all
value. It's
adds.
all inventory.
Exactly. Yeah. And this idea of inventory as well is really challenging to represent on a value stream, because we have stories of different sizes, work items of different sizes, batches of work items, and they're really tough. And it's tough. I mean, it's actually easier to represent that stuff in event storming, because it's all queue based, right?
Mm.
It's talking about queues. It's talking about where is work piling up. So I really like that about event storming, is that it's very conscious of this idea that work happens at different rates in
Mm.
different volumes. Because
Mm.
as we talk about flow, we think of flow as very simple and linear, but even the flow of a stream has depth to it, right? And it does branch and converge. So it's really not that simple, but we try to make it simple to be valuable.
Got it. Okay.
And I think that you touched the point, right? Because you talk about the different views, the universe view, the world view, and so on and so forth. Um, and this is the point, right? This representation, we have a team of 5 people, different batches size, different workloads, and then we have the customer. And this is where, in my opinion, value stream mapping and Wardley mapping match, because Wardley mapping has this idea of evolution and components, and we can zoom out a lot with components. But with value stream, by default, we zoom in. We want to know the details. Okay, we have these boxes, what we do in a sprint, but then we detail way more, which is way messier in Wardley mapping. If we bounce back between these two different techniques or these visual representations, with Wardley map, we have our value chain and we see, okay, the customer here doesn't receive the value of this component. Let's just zoom in inside of this component and try to see what happened. Okay, now we move from an evolution of the component point of view to a time view of this inside of this component or team that owns this component or whatever. And let's describe these. If we do these on 2 or 3 components, we then can avoid, or we can tend to avoid, micro optimizations. Is the problem inside of this team? Or by the way, it's the project manager in this example that is across everything and everyone is waiting for the project manager. Is the project manager the solution? So I like these using and getting back to the beginning also to talk to our audience how this can be useful, at least was useful for me to combine these.
Hmm. Right. This is the thing that I think is so powerful about this ability to zoom out and zoom in, and especially now that we have the tools to be doing this really effectively, because we don't have to start a new board and then, or like tear down the paper and like put it to the side and start a new map, or like, move to a bigger conference room. We can really do this in a very constructive way. But this ability to zoom in is super valuable, not only to get to the right detail, but to start at the right detail as well. Like the ability to start high and save a lot of time and not going into detail too early. This idea of graduated complexity, I think, is super powerful, because, and this is like informs my entire view of how to do value stream mapping. And it's very different than a lot of people. Most people stick to very high level value streams, and they say don't use value stream mapping to like dig into detail into a specific process. But I think you can use it wherever you want, use it in whatever context you want. We have the ability to zoom in as far as you want. You can zoom into like, what is every minute of my morning routine, and map
Yes.
that value stream. If it's going to pay off every day of your life for the rest of your life, so maybe it's a worthwhile investment, right? It doesn't have to be this gigantic high level operational thing. And so I was remembering that I could finally paste things in. I have this illustration of value chain down to value stream, but then zooming in and in and in, and kind of like picking these points to kind of dig deeper.
Yep. Yeah.
Which I hope is sort of valuable. But I think I don't like drawing boundaries around value stream mapping and say, it's not going to be useful for this. I think it's useful for a lot of different contexts and a lot of different zoom levels. And that I think is one of the most powerful things, is the ability to zoom out and zoom in.
Okay. I have a theory, and I'm gonna try to like run it by the two of you, and you can tell me what I'm getting right and what I'm getting wrong. So I'm gonna work up here in kind of like this top right hand section here. I just drew a little square, and I'm gonna take these basic parts that we just kind of described. Right. I'm gonna take sprint planning and development and code review and code merge and all that kind of stuff. And I'm gonna start out. And I'm gonna say, and this is probably gonna be wrong, but I'm gonna say like, okay, start with a Wardley map. Let's say start focused on ontology, and in Wardley mapping, the verb, you don't actually need to start with the map. You need to start with even simpler things. You need to start with who's being served by the system, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so really the question is like, at the end of your value stream, who's getting value? So presumably there's some sort of like recipient of software development value. So I'll say user of software system. They're getting some kind of value from working software, and that's my oversimplification of this value chain. Okay, great. So how does working software come to be from a capability standpoint? So a Wardley frame. Well, what's the list of things? What's the list of activities, practices, data, knowledge that we leverage in order to produce this working software? Well, yeah, you've got sprint planning because we want to know what to build for them. You've got the actual development that occurs in order to produce that, whatever we decide to build, we have to actually build it. So that's great. So that starting to build our value chain out here. And then after development, we need some sort of like review just to we've had streams before where we've talked about alternatives to code review, such as like mob programming and pair programming and all sorts of fun stuff. Okay, but this is very stage gatey, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so you can see how this builds. Isn't that weird? Like it just kind of looks like a value stream flipped on its side in a weird way. Like, because in order for each capability to perform, it needs the previous step to also be performing. But that's only because we sliced it with this ontology in
Right.
this way. Like we
And
decided to slice it in this way.
I think it's incredibly powerful to represent it this way because, especially for teams who haven't thought about their software delivery process with this lens,
Mm-hmm.
because another really interesting thing about this, and this is, I'm sure, where you're going, but I'm super excited about this idea that like all of these activities can be automated or outsourced or facilitated or supported in various ways. You could outsource everything all the way up, right, to your customer and basically say, yeah, we do, like, we resell the software that's developed by other companies.
Mm-hmm.
So we're not even doing all that stuff. It's all happening, but it's all in our mind, it's commoditized. We're just reselling something that's available on the market from anybody else. But our sales process and our ability to deliver is our secret sauce. That's our and I'm probably skipping ahead here, but I'm excited about this. I think this is really valuable because there are, what we're going to see with this software development process over the next, well, we're constantly seeing it, is this evolution towards, code reviews increasingly automated, right? It's our ability to static analyze code and look for security holes. That's all being accomplished by specialized tools and sometimes in-house development that's replacing like human activities. So very relevant in a value chain.
And I think maybe just to sort of hint at where this could end up, here's the question for you, Steve, and then I'm going to ask João to kind of do some reflection on what all this means. I think when you draw a value stream, here's the question: does it ever look like this to the right, where like there are branches and things coming together and weird flows like that? Does a value stream ever look like that?
100%, 100%, and that is, to me, that is part of the value. Like, if we can uncover hidden complexity, or if we can actually visualize perceived complexity, like people feel that, yeah, we're not going to be able to make a value stream map because our process is so messy. That is, it's valuable to state that. It's valuable to expose that. If you can't represent your work in a value stream map, it's probably too complex and it probably needs to be simplified. There's things that you can do to make it more linear. And there's probably, I'm gonna throw to João because I really want to hear his perspective on this as well. But I'm gonna paste in some other screenshots that kind of speak to this this complexity and the representation of this complexity, because I think it's an awesome topic.
I just have to like copy and paste that branched view of the value stream and rotate it 90 degrees. And I have a question mark here. I've been very careful to separate value streams from value chains because they were developed with different things in mind, and one is oriented around time and the other is oriented around dependency. But there is to consider these methodologies just full of raw material. How could you take what's useful in each frame and apply it to better understand the work? You don't have to use mapping or value streams in the way that any of us have, or the way that like the industries have dictated them be used over the years, right? So recognizing that we're at the top of the hour, like João, I see you pasted an emoji in there. What's going through your mind seeing this? And kind of like, where is this conversation headed? And frankly, for the years to come, what are we going to have to explore?
Yeah, I do think, I really do think that more people like Steve will pop out in communities saying, look, I cross these techniques, right? And look to what is popping out and the information that this is exposes, right? My reflection here is that we are sitting on a pile of data and information, and we figure out how to work, right? From the startup to the enterprise. I really like what Steve is putting there, your current org chart versus how people interact and the value streams. I'm a proponent of domain-based organizations. And I do think that we should pivot as you did, right? What if this is being on horizontal, looks like the vertical one, and we get rid about the queues? And rather than we talk about the queues, what can we evolve? And if we evolve this component and we are talking about scenarios, if we go back to the queues, does this influence the queue or not? And I think that we are not, and this is my point, as professionals in this industry, we are not used to bounce back between these visualizations. We get one visualization, here is my hammer, everything looks like a nail. And yes, another shameless plug, that's why myself and Kenny, we start the visual collaboration tools book, bringing all of these techniques that don't go with each other, it's just practitioners. Then I cross with Steve that, okay, I put these four, but he says, okay, swap out outcome map and put in impact mapping, right? And we need to get this mindset, which led us to what is on the bottom, right? We have our org chart and we have our value streams. Can we discuss these? Where are the pockets of value? Where are the things that needs to pivot and we need to reorganize ourselves to remove this friction, right? And I think that this reflection for the years to come, it's a very interesting one. And I'm looking for people to bring this to life. What they are crossing, right? There are people crossing Wardley maps with team topologies. It's very, very interesting what is there. Okay, I want to evolve these. This is my value stream. What capabilities in terms of people and teams and support do I need to form to move these from left to right? We need more of these discussions, in my opinion.
I want to catch the references here. So first of all, Steve, I need to know where people can get your book.
Flow.visible.is is where to download the ebook. And we made it through almost half. So I will, if we have an opportunity to pick the discussion up, because we get into some really interesting stuff. We haven't actually got to where I think Wardley mapping is most powerful in flow engineering. So we'll see if we get a chance to pick up a part 2 of this. I think we could get us we've really covered the foundation here, but there's so much like really interesting stuff.
Excellent.
But yeah, flow.visible.is is the ebook, but I would love to keep this conversation going because it's like, this has been fantastic.
Yeah, thanks for being here, Steve. And then João, you mentioned something that you and Kenny have been working on. Where do we find that?
Definitely. So LeanPub Visual Collaboration Tools. It's there. It's open to community. Anyone that wants to contribute can reach out. So we have describing some visual collaboration tools, and also we have field stories. How did people use these? So for instance, I'm very close to event storming, and there is someone almost publishing a story within data science, which is like black art for me, black magic. How they use event storming there, which is very, very interesting, right? And then also we have a part of combining tools, right? If we combine event storming with example mapping, what teams that create software can pop up. And this is very, very interesting. And the other part is social one that we are very attached. We ask money for people you can download for free, but then we donate for inclusion and diversity programs in tech, and that flows through open collective, so it's transparent for everyone. And this is what we do with money, and this is what we start, and we are very proud, and will always be an incomplete work. We need more people to tell us or linking resources like to Steve, what are you doing and combining and why? This is extremely powerful.
I love it. Yeah, community driven, community contributed. I love it. All right. Excellent. Steve, João, thank you. I'm really grateful that you took the time to hang out with us and lay the groundwork for an exploration into flow engineering and value stream mapping and value chain mapping. Like, lovely little kind of connections that we're going to make here. And to all of you watching, thank you for being here as well. We really appreciate you coming to these streams and hanging out with us and asking great questions in the chat. It's been, honestly, half the fun is reacting to what people say in the chat with some of these streams too. But of course, it's been marvelous to have you both. You can follow these folks on their social media in the description. You can find the links to their Twitters and ping them on there if you'd like. But yeah, thank you for being here, and always feel welcome to reach out and find us on the Twitters to say give us feedback or let us know what you'd like to see more of. Thank you all for being here, and with that, I'm gonna say goodbye.
Thanks, everybody.